Hey there, folks. Thanks for checking in to MrUlrich'sLandofBiology.com. I am Mr. Ulrich. In this video, first of the unit on ecology, we're going to be looking at interactions between organisms. We're going to look at three basic types of interactions: trophic interactions, symbiotic interactions, as well as mention some altruistic interactions. So, of course, if we're going to discuss interactions between organisms, we need to be able to describe the organisms as individuals, as populations. And in ecology, when we're describing that role, we're talking about that organism's niche or niche. However you pronounce it, it's going to mean the same thing. Now, when I meet people for the first time, the question that almost always comes up is, so, Mr. Ulrich, what do you do? And when I tell them I'm a high school teacher, the next question, of course, is, where do you do it? Part of describing the niche of an organism is where it carries out its job. So here we're talking about terms like habitat, or words that would describe an organism's habitat, or words that would describe an organism's biome would be rolled into this portion of the description of its niche. I teach at New Paltz High School is how I earn the resources that I need in order to obtain my fuel, largely. My fuel not just to get to and from school, but also to eat. So ecologically speaking, that's really, as a heterotroph, that's what I'm looking for. Of course, there are some terms that we're going to use in describing how an organism goes about getting its fuel, like those listed there. And I don't think any of those terms should be new to you. So many of these relationships are going to center around fuel, either getting fuel, as the case of these predatory ants, or being fuel, as the case of the prey of those predatory ants. I'm not really sure what those ants are eating there, but certainly looks like it's got legs, that's for sure. Ooh, don't want to be that guy. Anyway, so either getting fuel or being fuel. And it's like deer eat plants. They don't always kill the plants by consuming parts of them, but oftentimes they do. And detritivores, these are the scavengers. Can't downplay their role, really. These guys are really, really important, as that turkey vulture is consuming that roadkill, whatever it is, maybe a rabbit. It's going to use it as fuel and convert that biotic rabbit into abiotic carbon dioxide. Well, we can't talk about interaction without talking about competition. Now, you remember competition. This goes back to when we were talking about evolution and Darwin's theory of natural selection, how that incorporated the struggle for limited resources. Well, if resources are going to be limited, that means that there's only a certain number of individuals that can be supported by those resources that are available, and that's what we're talking about with carrying capacity. Now, what are we talking about as far as resources goes? Well, where resources go, well, we are talking about habitat. You got to have space to live. Certainly enough area to run around and get your food if you're a heterotroph. But even if you're an autotroph, you have to have access to nutrients. These are certainly important resources, and we can't forget mates. Certainly, mate competition is a significant factor. Well, we know that populations don't stay the same, and competition doesn't always stay the same either. They can be tied together, so as populations rise, especially over carrying capacity, we're going to see increases in competition. But we can also increase competition just by decreasing the amount of resources that are available, and that would, of course, decrease the carrying capacity and increase competition. Now, this competition can be between two different species. Say we have hawks and bull snakes are both competing for a limited amount of rodents to eat. But the hawks are competing amongst themselves for the same limited amount of rodents to eat. The way I always remember this is intramural sports are played between school districts. So like intramural football is when we play walk hill in football, whereas intramural sports, those are things that are played within the walls. That's what intramural really means. So that'd be like the girls' football game, or when we have pickleball tournaments. Sometimes the nature of the interaction is so close and interdependent that we refer to the relationship as symbiotic, literally living together. This definition isn't quite as exact as maybe we'd like it to be, like what is close. So there are cases where some people would describe some things as symbiotic that other people wouldn't. But in any case, these are pretty interesting interactions, especially on like an evolutionary level. But of course, in order for the interaction, the trait to interact with one another, to exist, to persist from one generation to the next, at least one member of the pair has to show some benefit. If there wasn't a selective benefit, then it certainly, that relationship wouldn't last very long. Well, when most people think of symbiosis, they immediately think of mutualism, which is one version of a symbiotic relationship. This, of course, is when both get some benefit, just as in the case of Finding Nemo here, the tomato clownfish swimming amongst sea anemone. Both of them are benefited from predation, helping each other out on this one. Commensalism is another version of symbiosis. This has to do with one of the organisms benefiting, usually by getting food, and the other organism doesn't really care. There are some benefits. We'll talk about competitive exclusion, things like that, but most of the gut bacteria that we have is really just getting food from us and taking up space. The third one that we'll talk about, the third version of symbiosis that we'll talk about, is my favorite personally. This is parasitism. This is where one of them certainly gets a meal in many cases, or a free ride, and is benefited, and the other one is actually harmed, either misses out on a meal or is weakened in some way. And there are also lots of great examples of this out there. The last type of interaction that we'll look at is altruism. Altruism is when an organism helps out another organism, just really for the sake of being nice, is what it seems. The classic example of this is amongst meerkats. One meerkat in a whole group of browsing, grazing meerkats will act as a sentinel, standing up and they take turns doing this, one at a time or two at a time. Will stand up and kind of scan the skies looking for hawks and other predators, and when they see one, they make an alarm call, and all of their meerkat friends run for cover. The risk, of course, is that by standing up, the hawk is going to see them and kind of eat them. A classic example is among birds. Birds have a tendency to help each other out as far as when it comes to brooding. Moms with their chicks, and these are fairy wrens. Fairy wrens engage in what seems to be actually more mutualism, in that mom gets some help getting more food for her young, and mom or the helper stands a really good chance of inheriting a good feeding space. So it's a little bit more closer to mutualism these days. But at any rate, altruism can be both intraspecific between the same species or interspecific between different species, just like competition can be. Alright, I think that's probably enough for one podcast. Thanks for checking in to MrUlrichsLandofBiology.com. Of course, you can always email me questions or feedback or anything like that to the email address there on the screen. And if you got here through some alternate route, make sure that you get to MrUlrichsLandofBiology.com to get other notes and supporting documents and labs and all of the other things that you need to be successful in class. Well, speaking of class, we'll see you there.